The inventory was sound, an investment like any other. I made a final tally on the slate in my head, a practice honed by years of running silver caravans out of Markarth. My assets for this venture were as follows: potions of ultimate healing, 12 vials, brewed by a master alchemist in solitude who swore by the purity of her reagents. 1,600 septums apiece, but I had negotiated a bulk discount. Total value, 18,600 gold, scrolls of grand healing 6, sourced from the College of Winterhold itself, a personal favor from an old contact. For emergencies, value 6,000 septums. Custom enchanted amulets of resist shock, 4, each a flawless sapphire set in Sidna mine silver, bearing a soul gem grand enough to hold a storm atronach captive. The Dwemer were known for their lightning traps, even a necessary precaution. Value 32,000 septums, ever-burning torches 8. A clever Altmer enchantment I had commissioned. Guaranteed to burn for 200 hours unaffected by wind or water. A significant overhead, but light was paramount. Value 4,000 septums, mercenary contracts 2. Paid in full, up front to ensure loyalty. Stenvar Stonefist, a Nord of some renown from the Windhelm docks, and a grim-faced Redguard named Hafiz who came recommended by a shipping magnate in Dawnstar. Their fee was exorbitant, but their survival rates were supposedly higher. My ledger recorded them as operational expenses. Mage Contract 1. Nelakar, an Altmer specialist in Dwemer lore and alteration magic. He had been a pet project of that eccentric scholar Calselmo for a time, which gave him a certain pedigree. Arrogant, odd but knowledgeable. His fee was half paid, the remainder contingent on recovery of significant artifacts, a performance-based incentive, and my personal assistant, Gaius Flavius. His cost was his salary, a negligible figure. He was here to carry the packs and document our findings. The grand total represented a significant portion of my liquid capital, but the potential return was astronomical. Unlooted Dwemer ruins did not simply appear every day. When my miners broke through a wall deep in the silver seams and found not more rock but the unmistakable bronze gleam of Dwemer metal, I knew it was a sign from Zenithar himself. This was not a delve into some Draugr-infested crypt. This was a business acquisition. I stood at the entrance, a perfectly circular doorway carved into the granite belly of the Reach, and breathed in the smell of cold, dead air. It was the smell of opportunity. It was the smell of profit. Stenvar stood beside me, his face a mask of Nordic indifference. Nelakar was a few feet back, muttering incantations and making the air shimmer around his hands. Gaius was checking the straps on the heavy leather packs, his movements quick and nervous. Let the Silver Blood family have their prisons and their political games with the Jarl. Thongvor Silver Blood could posture and pretend he ruled Markarth. I dealt in tangible assets. In history we could melt down and sell. The first elevator groaned under our weight, a sound of metal complaining after millennia of silence. Nelakar had worked for an hour to reactivate the mechanism using a series of precisely modulated electrical spells that made my teeth ache, and the cost of his magicka was not my concern as long as he performed his function. We descended into a darkness so complete that the light from my enchanted torch seemed to be physically beaten back by it. The air grew warmer, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and stagnant like old blood. Platform is stable, Stenvar grunted, his voice a low rumble. He stepped off the bronze disc first, his steel shield raised, his axe in hand. The torchlight glinted off the intricate carvings on his armor. He moved with a practiced economy, a tool well suited for its purpose. I had paid for that purpose. I stepped off after him, Gaius scrambling at my heels. Nelakar was last, his robes whispering against the metal floor. The chamber was vast, a perfect sphere of interlocking bronze plates. Walkways crisscrossed the empty space above us, leading to doors sealed with alien geometry. This was architecture on a scale that defied practicality. It was art, and it was waiting to be liquidated. "The schematics are unfamiliar," Nelikar said, his voice sharp with a mix of academic excitement and caution. "The resonance here is strong. Be prepared for automated defenses." His warning came a half-second too late. A section of the wall slid open with a hiss of steam and a Dwemer sphere rolled out. It was not one of the smaller models I had seen in Calselmo's museum. This was a larger variant plated in what looked like ebony-laced bronze, its arms tipped with long, cruel blades. It unfolded itself from a compact ball into a humanoid engine of death, its single red eye glowing with cold intelligence. "Contact!" Stenvar roared, planting his feet. He took the initial charge on his shield, the clang of metal on metal echoing through the huge chamber like the stroke of a forge hammer. The force of the impact sent him skidding back several feet, his boots grating against the bronze. Hafiz, the Red Guard, flanked it, his scimitar a blur. But the sphere was too quick. It spun, one of its bladed arms catching Hafiz across the chest. The sound was a sickening crunch of metal tearing through armor and flesh. He went down without a sound, his contract effectively terminated. A sunk cost. I made a mental note to adjust the projected profits. "It is reinforced," Nelikar shouted, launching a bolt of lightning from his fingertips. The spell sizzled against the sphere's chassis, leaving a blackened scorch mark but doing little else. "My spells are being dampened," Stenvar roared again, a battle cry that was pure Nord rage, and drove his axe into the sphere's articulated shoulder joint. Metal screamed. The sphere staggered, its red eye fixing on him. It brought both arms down in a vicious scissor motion. Stenvar tried to block, but one blade slipped past his shield, carving a deep gash in his leg from knee to thigh. He grunted in pain, stumbling back, blood soaking his leather trousers. "Use a potion," I snapped, my voice tighter than I intended. This was not going according to plan. The mercenary was damaged goods. Stenvar ignored me, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the automaton. He was losing blood at an alarming rate. This was an inefficient use of a valuable asset. "Damn it, Stenvar, the potion!" I yelled. "That is an order." He hesitated, and then reached into his belt pouch with a grimace, pulling out one of the shimmering red vials. He downed it in a single gulp. I watched the deep cut on his leg knit itself together, the flesh closing with an unnatural speed. 1,860 septums gone, just like that. My irritation was a sharp, bitter taste in my mouth. Nelikar, seeing his elemental spells failing, shifted his approach. He began chanting in a low, guttural language, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. The air around the Dwemer sphere seemed to thicken, to congeal. The automaton slowed, its movements becoming sluggish as if it were moving through thick mud. "Now!" the mage cried out. Stenvar, his leg healed, charged forward again. This time his axe found its mark. He buried it deep in the sphere's central chassis, right below the glowing red eye. The automaton shuddered. Its limbs went limp. The red eye flickered and died. It collapsed onto the bronze floor with a final deafening crash. Silence returned to the chamber, broken only by Gaius's ragged breathing. He was pressed against the wall, his face pale. "One mercenary down," I said, walking over to the fallen Red Guard. I did not check for a pulse. The state of his armor was sufficient information. A 50% loss in security personnel. "This is an unacceptable rate of attrition, Nelikar." The Altmer glared at me, his own breathing heavy. "This is not some crumbling Nordic barrow, Valence. These are the works of the Dwemer. Their defenses are not to be underestimated. That sphere was a masterpiece of engineering. It adapted to my magic. It would have killed us all if not for my quick thinking. Your quick thinking cost me a mercenary and a potion of ultimate healing, I retorted. I pointed at the deactivated sphere. Is this salvageable? The core, perhaps? Nelacar looked at me with open disgust. The core is shattered. Its value is purely academic now. He walked over to Stenvar, who was testing his weight on his newly healed leg. Are you fit to continue? I am, the Nord said, his voice flat. He did not look at me. He was looking at the body of his fallen comrade, a bond of shield brothers or some such sentimental nonsense. It was a business arrangement. Emotions were a liability in our line of work. I did not understand why people insisted on having them. We proceed, I declared. Gaius, search Hafiz's pack for any remaining supplies. Leave the body. It has no further utility. Gaius whimpered but did as he was told, his hands shaking. He pulled out a water skin and a half-eaten loaf of bread. Useless. I studied the massive chamber again. My initial excitement had been tempered by the harsh reality of the numbers. The expedition was already running at a loss. We would need to find something of immense value to recoup the initial investment. I refused to let this venture fail. My reputation in Markarth was built on unwavering success. Pavo Valence did not lead losing enterprises. I looked at the dark, silent doorways leading deeper into the ruin. There was more. There had to be. My hand went to the cool sapphire of the amulet around my neck, a 32,000 septim investment. It had better work when called upon. The thought was not as reassuring as it should have been, and the silence of the ruin felt different now. It was not empty. It was waiting. The next level down was different. The clean geometric precision of the Dwemer architecture gave way to something older, more organic. The bronze walls were slick with moisture and coated in a pale, phosphorescent fungus that cast the tunnels in a sickly green light. The air was heavy, wet, and smelled of rot and decay. The ever-burning torches in our hands seemed to struggle against the gloom, their enchanted flames flickering as if in a strong wind, though the air was unnervingly still. This is not Dwemer, Nelacar stated, running a gloved hand along the wall. He pulled it back, examining the slimy residue. This is a subsequent infestation, Falmer. As if summoned by his words, a chittering sound echoed from the darkness ahead. It was a wet, clicking noise, accompanied by the scraping of claws on stone. Falmer, Stenvar growled, the word a curse. He raised his shield again, his stance solid, a rock against the coming tide. Blind, but they can hear a fly sneeze at 100 paces, and their smell is better than a wolf's. They are a degenerate race, Nelacar added, his voice laced with the typical Altmer disdain for any lesser myrrh. Twisted by the Dwemer into these things. Be wary of their shamans. Their magic is crude but potent. Gaius was trembling so hard I could hear his teeth chattering. Falmer? By the Eight Master, we should turn back. There is no profit to be made fighting those creatures. Silence, Gaius, I snapped. Profit is determined by the value of the acquisition, weighed against the cost of retrieval. The presence of Falmer is merely another column on the ledger. We press on. I did not believe my own words. Not entirely, a knot of something unfamiliar was tightening in my stomach. It felt like bad debt. We moved forward, Stenvar in the lead, his footsteps unnaturally quiet for a man his size. I was behind him, with Nelacar and Gaius following. The chittering grew louder, closer. It seemed to come from all directions at once. Then we saw them. They emerged from fissures in the rock, their pale, eyeless faces turned towards us. Their bodies were hunched and twisted, clad in crude armor made from the chitin of some great insect. They carried swords of the same material and strangely shaped bows. There were dozens of them. "Hold the line!" Stenvar bellowed. The tunnel was narrow here, a natural choke point, a tactically sound position. And the first wave of Falmer rushed us, shrieking, their movements unnervingly fast and fluid. Stenvar met them with his shield, a wall of steel and muscle. His axe rose and fell, cleaving through chitin and pale flesh. Nelacar chanted, and a rune flared to life on the floor in front of him. The first few Falmer to step on it were consumed by a flash of fire, their shrieks turning to screams of agony. I drew the silver dagger from my belt. It was more a symbol of office than a weapon, but I would not be seen cowering. I stood my ground behind Stenvar, stabbing at anything that got past his guard. Gaius screamed and dropped the pack he was carrying. Several of our remaining healing potions shattered on the stone floor, their precious red liquid mixing with the filth. "You fool!" I roared, my fury momentarily eclipsing my fear. Those were worth a fortune. A Falmer shaman standing at the back of the horde raised a staff topped with a glowing crystal. It chanted in a rasping tongue, and the air crackled with foul energy. The flame on my ever-burning torch sputtered violently, then shrank to a tiny, pathetic flicker. The same thing happened to Stenvar's and Nelacar's. The green light of the fungus was all that remained, casting long, dancing shadows that made it impossible to tell friend from foe. "The magic is failing," Nelacar yelled over the din of battle. "Their shaman is disrupting the enchantments." Another liability? Another miscalculation? The Altmer who sold me these torches had not mentioned this particular vulnerability. I would have to have a word with him, assuming I survived to do so. A chorus, a massive, eocentipede-like insect with powerful mandibles, burst from a side tunnel. It moved with terrifying speed, its chitinous plates clattering against the rock. It ignored Stenvar and Nelacar, its multifaceted eyes fixing on Gaius, who was frozen in terror. "Gaius, move!" I shouted. But he just stood there staring, his mouth open in a silent scream. The chorus slammed into him, its mandibles closing around his torso with a sound like a tree trunk snapping. It lifted him off the ground, shaking him like a dog with a rat. Then it was gone, dragging my whimpering assistant back into the darkness of its tunnel. Another expense, a minor one, but the loss of the pack was significant. We were now down to 5 healing potions, 3 scrolls, and a Nord who was fighting like a demon but was still only one man. The shaman shrieked again, he pointing its staff at Stenvar. A bolt of sickly green energy shot forth. Stenvar tried to block it with his shield, but the magic seemed to pass right through the metal. It struck him in the chest. He cried out, not in pain, but in shock, and staggered back. His armor began to corrode, the steel turning black and flaking away like old rust. "Poison magic!" Nelacar shouted. He unleashed a chain lightning spell, a far more powerful incantation than his earlier bolts. It leaped from Falmer to Falmer, leaving smoking husks in its wake. The shaman was caught in the blast and exploded in a shower of gore. With their leader gone, the remaining Falmer hesitated, then broke and fled back into the darkness. Silence fell once more. It was a heavier silence this time, filled with the stench of burned flesh, chorus musk, even the coppery smell of Stenvar's blood. He had a small cut on his arm where the poison had grazed him. It was weeping a black viscous fluid. "This is not good," Nelacar said, examining the wound. "This is a potent alchemical toxin. A standard healing potion will not be enough." "Then use one of the scrolls," I ordered. My voice was hoarse. Nelacar shook his head. "A scroll of grand healing might counteract it, but it would be a waste. The scroll is designed to heal grievous physical wounds on multiple subjects. Using it for this would be like using a master's forge to mend a cooking pot." I can attempt to neutralize it with a counterspell, but it will drain me significantly. How significantly? I asked, my mind already doing the calculations. A drained mage was a useless mage. I will have little magicka left for offensive or defensive maneuvers. We would be vulnerable. And the alternative? We use one of the 4 remaining healing potions, Stenvar grunted, clutching his arm. Sweat beaded on his brow. It might not cure it, but it will slow it down. I thought for a moment. 4 potions left. 1 scroll. 1 mercenary who was now poisoned. 1 mage who was on the verge of magical exhaustion. This expedition was a disaster. The balance sheet was a sea of red ink. No, I said finally. The decision was cold, logical. We saved the potions. They are for life-threatening injuries. A cut on the arm is not life-threatening, not yet. Nelacar, do what you must with your magic. Be efficient about it. Stenvar looked at me. It was a long, hard look, and the kind of look a man gives you when he is re-evaluating your worth. I had seen it before, across a negotiation table when I had forced a rival into bankruptcy. But seeing it on the face of the man whose axe was the only thing between me and a horde of screeching monsters was unsettling. As you command, Nelacar said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He placed his hands on Stenvar's arm and began to chant. A white light enveloped the wound. The black fluid seemed to retreat, but the mage swayed on his feet, his face pale and drawn. It is done, he said, his voice a whisper. The poison is contained but not purged. It will resurface, and I am nearly spent. Then you should have been more efficient, I said, turning away from them. I picked up one of the flickering torches. Its flame was barely the size of my thumb. Let's move. We have wasted enough time and resources here. We continued on, deeper into the suffocating gloom. Stenvar was silent, his movements stiffer than before. Nelacar walked with the shuffling gait of an old man. The professional camaraderie, the transactional understanding that had bound us together was gone. It had been corroded just like Stenvar's armor. I was no longer a respected employer leading a profitable venture. I was a man with a dwindling supply of assets, walking alongside 2 men who were beginning to see me not as their patron but as the architect of their doom. The thought was illogical. They were paid for the risk. It was in the contract. But the feeling persisted, a cold dread that no amount of rationalization could dispel. The darkness ahead seemed to have teeth. We broke through into a cavern of impossible scale, and it was a city of stone and shadow, a subterranean world lit by the same giant glowing mushrooms that dotted the ceilings of Blackreach. Waterfalls of black water cascaded down cliffs that disappeared into the gloom above, and the air echoed with the distant chittering of Falmer and the deeper groan of the earth. In the center of the cavern, a massive Dwemer ziggurat rose from the ground, its bronze surfaces covered in the pale, web-like structures of Falmer habitation. This is it, Nelacar breathed, his voice filled with a scholar's awe, all traces of his earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten. A primary settlement. The artifacts here, they could be priceless. Priceless. The word was a balm to my frayed nerves. Priceless meant the ledger could be balanced. Priceless meant this entire disastrous expedition could still be salvaged. That ziggurat is our target, I said, my voice regaining some of its former authority. That is where the most valuable items will be stored. A treasury, a library. We find it, we loot it, and we get out. Getting to it will be the problem, Stenvar said, his voice a low growl. His eyes scanned the cavern floor. It was teeming with Falmer, not just the hunched, shrieking warriors we had encountered before, but larger, more heavily armored variants. Some rode on the backs of hulking Chorus, their chitinous mounts clicking and hissing. And in the distance, near the base of the ziggurat, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a Falmer, but larger than the others, almost the size of an orc, clad in heavy plate armor and wielding a warhammer that glowed with a faint, sickly light. "A Falmer warmonger," Nelacar whispered. "A chieftain. They are said to be as strong as 10 of their warriors. And cunning." "We do not engage," I said. "We find a way around them, a stealthy approach." Stenvar let out a short, harsh laugh. "Stealth? With him?" He jerked his head towards Nelacar. "A mage in robes is not built for sneaking, and you, Valence, you sound like a cart horse on a cobblestone street." "I am paying you to be the professional, Stenvar," I shot back. "Find a way." He just shook his head, his gaze returning to the cavern floor. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the sounds of the alien world below. It was Stenvar who finally spoke. "There, a ledge. It runs along the cavern wall about halfway up. It looks like it leads around to the back of the ziggurat. If we can get up there, we might be able to bypass the main force." It was a slim chance, but it was the only one we had. The climb was treacherous. The rock was slick with moisture, and the handholds were few and far between. I, who had spent my life in counting houses and upholstered chairs, found my muscles screaming in protest. My fine leather boots, designed for the polished floors of the understone keep, offered little purchase on the wet stone. Several times I slipped, my life saved only by Stenvar's iron grip on my arm hauling me back from the brink. He did it without a word, his face a mask of grim determination. He was fulfilling his contract. Nothing more. We made it to the ledge. It was barely wide enough for one man to walk comfortably. To our left was a sheer rock wall. To our right, a drop of several hundred feet to the cavern floor, even where the Falmer horde milled about, unaware of our presence. We began to inch our way along, the ziggurat our distant, silent goal. We were about halfway across when the ambush came. They did not come from the front or the back. They came from above. Falmer skirmishers hanging from the ceiling like bats dropped down onto the ledge around us. They were silent, their movements swift and deadly. The fight was a chaotic, desperate affair on the narrow precipice. There was no room for maneuver, no space for strategy. It was a crush of bodies, the shriek of Falmer, the clang of steel. Stenvar was a whirlwind of destruction, his axe and shield a blur. But he was fighting on a wounded leg, his movements a fraction slower than before. Nelacar, his magicka reserve still dangerously low, was forced to use his dagger, a weapon he handled with the awkwardness of a scholar forced into a brawl. One of the skirmishers lunged at me, its chitinous sword aimed at my throat. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on empty air. I fell. For a heart-stopping second, I was suspended over the abyss. Then my hand snagged on a root protruding from the rock face. I dangled there, the cavern floor spinning dizzyingly below me. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice a pathetic squeak. Stenvar was busy, a Falmer's blade locked with his axe. Nelacar was desperately fending off two at once. No one was coming. My fingers were slipping. The root was slick with slime. I was going to die. Then I remembered the amulet. The amulet of resist shock. It was useless against swords, but the soul that powered it. It was a grand soul, a powerful entity trapped in a sapphire cage. With my free hand, I tore the amulet from my neck. "Break!" I yelled, and I slammed it against the rock wall. The sapphire shattered. The enchantments holding the soul captive dissolved. For an instant, a blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from the broken gem. A wave of pure energy, the dying scream of a storm Atronach pulsed outward. The Falmer on the ledge were thrown from their feet. The two attacking Nelacar were flung into the abyss, their shrieks fading into the darkness. The one fighting Stenvar was blasted back against the rock wall, its body smoking. I managed to haul myself back onto the ledge, my body shaking uncontrollably. My most valuable asset, A 32,000 septim investment was gone, destroyed, but I was alive. "What did you do?" Nelacar demanded. I'm staring at the glittering dust that was all that remained of the amulet. "I liquidated an asset," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Stenvar pushed the smoking corpse of the Falmer off the ledge with his boot. He looked at me, then at the chasm below, then back at me. He said nothing. He did not need to. The judgment was in his eyes. I had saved myself, but I had squandered a resource that could have protected us all. We were in a bad state. My amulet was gone. Nelacar was almost completely drained of magicka. Stenvar had taken another cut on his arm during the fight, and the old poison seemed to be flaring up again. A black web of veins was spreading from the wound. We had 4 healing potions left. 4. "We have to keep moving," I said, forcing myself to my feet. The ziggurat was closer now. It seemed to loom over us, a silent monument to a dead race. It promised salvation, a fortune that would make all this suffering worthwhile. I clung to that thought. It was the only thing I had left. The back of the ziggurat was unguarded, as Stenvar had predicted. A single massive bronze door stood sealed before us. There were no visible locks, no handles, only a series of complex geometric patterns etched into its surface. "A tonal lock," Nelacar said, his voice weak. He ran his hand over the patterns. "It requires a specific sequence of frequencies to open, the kind of magic I am in no condition to perform." "So we are stuck?" I asked, a fresh wave of despair washing over me. "After all this?" "There is another way," the mage said. He pointed to a small circular indentation in the center of the door. "A power conduit. If we can overload it with a massive, an uncontrolled burst of energy, we might be able to short out the locking mechanism, but the energy required would be immense." My eyes fell on the other amulets. We had 3 left, 3 flawless sapphires, each containing the soul of a trapped storm atronach. 3 investments waiting to be cashed in. "Use one of the amulets," I said. The words tasted like ash. Nelacar looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You are certain? Once shattered, its protective enchantment will be lost forever." "Just do it," I said. "The cost is justified if it gets us inside." He took the amulet I offered him. He held it over the indentation and began to chant. This was not a spell of control, but of chaotic release. He was not unlocking the magic. He was breaking it. With a final word, he smashed the amulet against the door, and the explosion of energy was even greater this time. A blinding arc of lightning leaped from the shattered gem into the door. The air filled with the smell of ozone. The massive bronze door shuddered, groaned, and then, with a shriek of tortured metal, it slid open. We were in. The cost had been steep, but the treasury of the Dwemer was now within our grasp. I stepped through the doorway, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and avarice. The interior was dark, silent, and filled with the promise of unimaginable wealth. But we were not alone. The Falmer warmonger stood in the center of the chamber as if it had been waiting for us. It turned its eyeless face towards the sound of the opening door, and it raised its glowing warhammer. The fight was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The warmonger was a force of nature, was a whirlwind of muscle and rage. It moved with a speed that belied its size, its warhammer scything through the air. Nelacar, utterly spent, could only conjure a feeble light spell that flickered and died. He was useless, a spectator to our demise. Stenvar met the warmonger's first charge. The sound of the glowing warhammer crashing against his shield was like a thunderclap. The shield, made of solid steel, buckled and tore. The force of the blow sent Stenvar flying across the room. He slammed into a bronze pillar and crumpled to the floor, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. His contract was well and truly void. I was alone. The warmonger turned its attention to me. I was not a warrior. I was a merchant. My only weapon was my mind, my ability to calculate, to negotiate, to find an advantage. But there was no negotiation with this thing. There was no advantage to be found. It raised its hammer. I fumbled in my pouch, my fingers closing around a vial, a potion of ultimate healing, my last resort. But it would not save me from this. It could not regrow a head that had been smashed into pulp. Then my fingers brushed against something else, a scroll, one of the scrolls of grand healing, a tool for mending flesh, not for causing harm. But it was a concentration of pure magical energy. Restoration magic, the opposite of the corrupt poison that animated the Falmer. What would happen if that energy was unleashed not to heal, but as a weapon? It was a desperate, illogical gamble. An act of a man with nothing left to lose. I tore the seal on the scroll and read the incantation aloud, my voice cracking with terror. I did not direct it at myself, I directed it at the warmonger. A wave of brilliant golden light erupted from the scroll. It was not a destructive energy, but a vital, life-giving one. When it struck the warmonger, the creature shrieked, a sound of pure agony. It was a creature of poison and decay, a being antithetical to the very concept of life and restoration. The pure healing magic was anathema to it. Its flesh began to smoke and char, not as if burned, but as if it were being purified out of existence. It staggered back, its body dissolving, its armor clattering to the floor. With a final gurgling scream, it collapsed into a pile of dust and black ichor. I stood there, shaking, the empty scroll clutched in my hand. I had survived. By some miracle, I had survived. I rushed over to Stenvar. He was alive, but barely. In his shield arm was shattered, and a shard of bone protruded from the skin. His breathing was shallow. "A potion?" he wheezed, his eyes pleading. "Valence, please." I looked at him, then at the pouch at my belt. We had 4 potions left. No. Gaius had dropped a pack. I had seen at least 2 vials break. We had 2 left. 2 vials of red liquid, each worth a small fortune. 1 for Stenvar, 1 for me. It was a logical distribution. But what if there were more dangers ahead? What if I needed both? Stenvar was a broken asset. His utility was at an end. To use a potion on him would be to throw good money after bad. It was an emotional decision, not a practical one. I hesitated. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. The hope died, replaced by a look of utter contempt. It was the last look he ever gave me. "Save it," he coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Your profit margins are too tight." He closed his eyes. His breathing stopped. I was alone, truly alone now. Nelacar was slumped against a wall, conscious but unresponsive, his mind perhaps broken by the strain. I had 2 potions of ultimate healing, 2 amulets of resist shock, and a single flickering dying torch, and I was standing in the treasury of the Dwemer. The room was filled with chests, with racks of strange metal artifacts, with soul gems the size of my fist. It was a fortune, more than I had ever dreamed of, but as I looked at the silent, dead faces of my companions, at the pile of dust that was the warmonger, at the vast, oppressive darkness that surrounded this small island of torchlight, the gold and gems seemed to lose their luster. I started to fill my pack. My hands were clumsy, shaking. I stuffed soul gems into my pockets. I lifted a Dwemer helmet, its metal cool against my skin. This was what I had come for. This was the victory. This was the profit. I kept telling myself that over and over again as I worked. But the words were hollow. They were just numbers on a ledger that no longer seemed to matter. My torch sputtered. The flame shrank, turned blue, and went out. I was plunged into absolute total darkness, the kind of darkness that exists only in the deep places of the world. It was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, suffocating me. I could hear my own heart hammering in my chest. I could hear the drip of water somewhere in the vast, silent chamber. And I could hear something else, a faint chittering. They knew, the Falmer. They knew their chieftain was dead. And they knew the door was open. And they were coming. I abandoned the pack. The treasure was worthless now. Survival was the only currency that mattered. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands outstretched, feeling my way along the cold bronze walls. I had no idea where the door was. I was disoriented, lost. The chittering grew louder. It was inside the chamber now. I could hear the scrape of their claws on the metal floor. I could smell their foul, sour scent. My hand found the opening, the doorway. I scrambled through it back into the main cavern. The faint, ghostly light of the giant mushrooms was a blessing, a reprieve from the absolute blackness. I did not look back. I ran. I ran along the ledge, my breath sobbing in my lungs. I did not care about the drop. I did not care about anything but putting distance between myself and the things in the dark. I do not know how long I ran, hours, days. I blundered through tunnels, fell down inclines, waded through streams of icy water. I ate the glowing fungus on the walls. It tasted like dirt and despair. I was no longer Pavo Valence, merchant prince of Markarth. I was a hunted animal scrabbling for my life in the bowels of the earth. My mind frayed. The darkness was not just around me, it was inside me. I saw Stenvar's face, his eyes full of contempt. I heard Gaius's final, terrified scream. I saw the flash of the shattered amulets, thousands of septums turning to dust. It was a litany of my failures, a balance sheet of my soul, and it was written entirely in red. At some point I saw a light, a different kind of light, and not the sickly green of the fungus, but a pale gray light, daylight. I clawed my way towards it, up a steep, muddy slope. My fingers were raw, my nails torn. I did not care. The light was all that mattered. I burst through a tangle of roots and collapsed onto soft, damp earth. I was out. I was on the surface. The gray light of a sky-rimmed dawn filtered through the trees of a pine forest. The air was cold, clean, and sharp. It smelled of pine needles and wet soil. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. I lay there for a long time, just breathing. My fine clothes were in tatters. My body was a tapestry of cuts and bruises. I was filthy, starving, and utterly broken. I pushed myself to a sitting position. I took stock. My dagger was gone. The treasure was gone. My companions were gone. My entire investment was gone. My hand went to my belt pouch. It was still there. I opened it. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled inside. They closed around a small glass vial. Potions of ultimate healing, 1. Mercenaries, 0. Amulets of resist shock, 0. Scrolls of grand healing, 0. Ever-burning torches, 0. I held the potion up to the gray morning light. The red liquid within seemed to glow with a life of its own. 1,860 septums, it was all I had left. The sum total of my great enterprise. I was a rich man. A single number, that was the only thing that remained. A single meaningless number in the face of the vast silent dark.